Oh. Go. All right. We will be doing the skeletal system and the muscle system today. Okay, what's really cool about this is you guys are not mainly biology majors, so there's nothing that you really need to memorize here. I'm not saying memorize all 206 bones. Good luck, test is Friday. No, we're not doing that here, but what I do want you guys to understand is on these points to ponder, okay? So those questions, I didn't add that skeleton, that was just there. I thought that was pretty cool. The 5 functions, what are the components of the skeleton, what makes something up to be a large bone, how do bones grow, remodel, and repair, things like that. Then there'll be a second section of this PowerPoint that we do today, that's chapter 13. When we talk a little bit about muscles, the different types of muscles, and kind of how muscles contract. All right, so don't get overwhelmed with naming things, but kind of just understand those key concepts. We're talking about what the functions of the skeletal system are, and that is important for movement and support, protection, mineral storage, and blood cell formation. We learned in a previous lecture that the red bone marrow in our bone is where we create red blood cells, and only certain bones contain the tissue where blood cells form. Mineral storage kind of makes sense. If you know what a mineral is, this is a reservoir for calcium and phosphorus ions. These deposits and withdrawals of these ions help maintain their concentrations in body fluids. You've maybe heard the saying that, like, drink your milk for strong bones and teeth. Okay, when I think of that, I think of like calcium. Now, obviously, you can get calcium from other things, not just milk. But that's essentially what is made up of bones and teeth, are those mineral storage. So we're storing minerals that help us with those fluid concentrations in the rest of our body. We then are also here to protect. That makes sense, right? We've got a rib cage, and inside of our rib cage, we've got a lot of very important organs, right? You've got your heart and your lungs, all right inside that rib cage. So it's there for protection. Many bones form hardened chambers or canals that enclose and protect soft internal organs. Think of like your vertebrae. Your vertebrae is there for movement, which we talk about in a little bit, but it's also protecting your spinal cord. It's for support. It helps us as humans be upright. It helps us walk. It helps us support our neck. Think about your neck and your skull, how it supports and protects your brain and movement. Bones interact with skeletal muscles and change or maintain positions of the body and its parts. So those are the 5 functions of the skeletal system. Here's just a little bit about the human skeletal structure. So your skull is made up of multiple bones. Thinking about your skull and how it protects your brain. So that's one of the main reasons, but it also helps support. Then you have your rib cage there and your sternum. Those are what also help protect your internal organs there. You have your sacrum and your coccyx there highlighted in blue. Also like your tailbone, some people call it your tailbone. You have your skull, like it says, your vertebral column. And here's just a couple of the names of some of the common bones. We'll use some of this slide right here for our lab on Wednesday. I have like a diagram that we're going to fill out. It's just kind of like matching. And then you'll get to pick the different names, make your own bingo card, and then I'll randomly generate some words and we'll see who can remember the bones. There are different types of vertebrae, and maybe you are familiar with this. Maybe you've ever been to a chiropractor and they've maybe referred to a specific type of vertebrae. We have 33 vertebrae bones, And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types. So the cervical has nothing to do with the cervix of the female reproductive system. The cervical are the first 7 vertebrae working from superior to inferior. So superior to inferior from the skull and down. This image here, kind of the text on the right there is hard to see in person, but those first 7 are considered cervical. Then you have your thoracic, which kind of makes sense, like your thoracic cavity where your lungs, your heart is. That's that thoracic vertebrae. There are 12 of them, and they are after the cervical vertebrae. Then you have your lumbar vertebrae, which is kind of that lower back area. I think of lumber like, you know, when you have a tree and you knock down some wood and you have some lumber, some support. That's kind of how I think of those lumbar vertebrae. Those are 5. You have your sacrum, which are 5 fused vertebrae, so they don't look as distinguished as the rest. You can kind of see that towards the bottom of that picture. And then your coccyx, which is 4 fused into what is called the tailbone. You have intervertebral discs, which are cartilage between the vertebrae, and this luckily allows us to twist and bend and stretch. That's that cartilage between the vertebrae. Which is really important because, you know, you can't bend your arm in ways that it's not supposed to go, right? I can't just bend my forearm in this way. I break the bone. So that cartilage in our spine, that intervertebral discs, allows that movement that we are able to do. And if any of you have ever had a sore back, maybe it's hard to kind of move, which makes sense. So here is what we call the upper extremity skeleton. So upper meaning above, and the extremities meaning of the outer parts of your body. So like your arm is an extremity, okay? So of your upper extremity, so like in your arm area, here's a couple of different bones that maybe you've heard of before. Maybe you've heard of somebody having a broken bone or one of these. First we have the scapula, which kind of looks like a wing, per se. I think it looks like a wing. Up here on the top, this is your scapula. After your scapula, we have your clavicle. So this is your scapula, this is your clavicle. We have your humerus. It's pretty funny, I know, it's right there. Here's your humerus. You have your radius and your ulna, which are 2 bones that are in your forearm, radius and ulna. You have your carpals, which are kind of in your wrist, not your carpals. Your metacarpals, which are then kind of in the base part of your fingers, and your phalanges, which are on the top part of your fingers. So again, for those people on Zoom, we have your radius and your ulna, your carpals, your metacarpals, and your phalanges. Again,
That's a place.
Yes.
I don't think you're screen sharing.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, let's get you guys up to speed. So this was the 5 functions: movement, support, protection, mineral storage, and blood cell formation. This was that human skeletal structure. The blue highlighted ones were the ones that I kind of talked about in the center. Here's the different types of vertebrae that we were talking about, broken down. And here is where we are now. So we have the scapula, clavicle, humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So sorry that I thought I clicked it. No problem. Okay, lower extremity. So this is now the lower half of our body, but an extremity. An extremity would be like our arms and legs. So of our lower extremity skeleton, here is a couple of the main types of bones. So first we have our ilium. And our ilium, some people call it, this is a part of your pelvic girdle or your pelvic bone. So that ilium is that top part of your pelvic bone. You have your pubis, which is that bone that kind of protrudes out a little bit, and then your ischium, and your ischium is that bottom part of your pelvic girdle. Okay, so it kind of looks like a little seat, essentially. You have your femur, which is that big bone, and this is considered a long bone in the top part of your leg. Your tibia and your fibia, they kind of mock what your ulna and your radius do in my eyes. They are the two bones in that lower half of your leg. That's the tibia and the fibia. You have your tarsals, which are in the ankle, your metatarsals, which start on the top of your foot here, and then you have your phalanges, which are similar to those in your hand. I'll walk through that here so you guys can see that as well. This is considered the pelvic girdle. You have your ilium, which is up top, your pubis, which is kind of sticking out this way, and your ischium, which it comes out here towards the bottom. Your femur is that big long bone on the top of your leg. You have your tibia and your fibia, which are down here that kind of mock what your ulna and your radius do. And then you have your tarsals, your metatarsals, and your phalanges all down here, the phalanges being kind of towards your toes. Metatarsals, I think of it as like right on top of my foot. And then your tarsals kind of near your ankle. All right, so cartilage and bone tissue. So cartilage, you think of cartilage maybe in your nose or in your ear. It's structural yet bendy and movable, which is good, right? That for some, maybe if you're a wrestler, you've ever had like cauliflower ear or seen somebody who has cauliflower ear, that's that kind of inflammation and breakage of that cartilage in your ear. So cartilage can be found on the ends of long bones, which kind of makes sense, right? So the long bones in our body are like our femur and our humerus, okay? And think about where most of the bending happens in your body. You've got some bending at your elbow, you have some bending like this, now I'm doing the chicken dance, and then you've got some bending in your knee. So that cartilage on the ends of those long bones, it's there for a couple of different reasons. It's there for structural support, it's there to be able to help with movement, and also for impact, right? It's the reason why you can stand up on a cement floor for a long time and it's not like wearing and tearing on your bones. Now, eventually maybe you start to get sore if you're standing on a cement floor for a really long time. But the cartilage, it helps with those things. What also helps is the spaces in the spongy bone tissue, and that's kind of what you see here at the bottom. It looks like a little kind of red and like kind of off-whitish, tannish color that looks like a little web, and that is that spongy kind of ends of your bone. I think of it like a dish sponge, right? You have a sponge that you wash dishes with, because we all wash dishes, right? Eventually. That sponge is on the ends of those bones to also help with movement and impact. Because let's be honest, you know, maybe somebody's ever broken their arm or broken their leg before. Most of the time, it's because of high impact in a certain area, right? So our bones are dealing with impact all the time. It depends where that impact is and also how our body kind of reacts to that in order to stand up and such things. There's a picture of a giraffe here to show also that they would have different structural things that allow for their long neck to be up to get to those tops of the trees to get their food, and how that impact of their cartilage and bone tissue would be different than a human's. There are 3 types of cartilage. The first one is hyaline cartilage, second one is fibrocartilage, and the third is elastic cartilage. So those are the 3 types of cartilage, and they are found throughout your body and they have different functions. Cartilage in general is a flexible connective tissue categorized based on the type and arrangement of the matrix fibers. Matrix fibers means like the little string-like substances that make up the cartilage. Okay, so we're getting zoomed in. What actually is cartilage made of? So hyaline cartilage is on the ends of long bones, your nose, the ends of your rib cage, your larynx, and your...
Apologies.
Oh.
I couldn't hear.
Siri couldn't hear what I was saying. Hyaline cartilage, it's on the ends of your ribs, your larynx, and your trachea. Okay, this is going to be maybe one of the more common ones that you think of because it's in your nose and the ends of your ribs and things like that. Your fibrocartilage, keyword here is fibro, are discs between your vertebrae. They are in the knee and they are stronger than hyaline cartilage. Okay, so think about it. Your back and your knee, things like that, that have a lot of more impact, they're going to need more strength. That's that fibrocartilage. And lastly, we have elastic cartilage. This is in your ear flaps, your epiglottis, which is from the digestive system, and they are more flexible than hyaline cartilage. So those are the three different types of cartilage. So thinking about how a bone is made and what the structure is in that bone. Bone matrix is made up of collagen fibers and calcium minerals. So the matrix means kind of that space in between. Collagen fibers, which are string-like substances, kind of think of like hairs or strings made up of collagen, and they make like a web-like structure that helps with impact as well as support. There's different types of bone cells: osteocytes, osteoblasts, and osteoclasts. I'm sorry, that's hard to say with a mask on, but you guys can read it right there. Those are the types of bone cells. If you were to look at a microscope and to be able to distinguish what a bone cell looks like, I think of this little picture right here. It's kind of grayish, black, kind of maybe even greenish blue color here. That is what a bone cell looks like. First you have kind of this like ring, like it kind of looks like the ring of a tree. You know, if you cut a tree in half and you open it up and you can see all the different rings, and maybe you did that in elementary school and they said that you can count how many rings there are to know how old the tree is. Okay, well this is kind of like that, but not really. So the bone cell kind of has like a circular ring-like substance, and then in the middle is a blood vessel, and that blood vessel is in that compact bone. So we have spongy bones on the ends that have the red bone marrow, and you have the compact bone, which is that middle part. It's harder, that has a blood vessel that runs right down it. And so here's another picture right here that's showing the difference between compact bone, which is here, and spongy bone. And I'll draw an arrow for those people. It's compact bone is here, and spongy bone is here. Spongy bone thinking like a dish sponge, compact thinking hard and strengthening. And what those are important for, the compact bone houses blood vessels, and the spongy bone is where that red bone marrow is located in order to make red blood cells. There are cells that are important in bone growth, remodeling, and repair. We're really thankful that most of us, if we were to break an arm, your body can recover and repair from that. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. It depends on how bad the fracture is, or what type of growth, remodeling, and repair that needs to happen. But our body can most likely recover from that because of these different important cells. So the osteocytes are mature bone cells that maintain bone structure, and they are derived from osteoblasts. And osteoblasts are the bone-forming cells, and osteoclasts, which is the opposite, they are the bone-absorbing cells. So they are grabbing and taking a part of the damage. So here's a little bit more about bone growth. So it starts with cartilage. It's a cartilaginous model, and it develops and becomes calcified during fetal development. So we talked a little bit about fetal development a couple of days ago, and how the bones start out as cartilage, a structural, supportive, but yet kind of bendy and flimsy. That's what they're talking about here. It's a cartilage model. Starts out of cartilage. And then we get these osteoblasts, which are a certain type of cell, and it covers the diaphysis with a compact bone collar. Okay, so think about like a collar on your dog or your cat. Does anybody have a cat collar for their cat? That's pretty cool too. And it essentially, these osteoblasts cover that compact bone collar. And then the blood vessels bring the osteoblasts into the cartilage. At a primary ossification center, the osteoblasts start to form that spongy bone. Spongy bone, remember, it's on the ends, it's there for impact, it's sponge-like. It's still structural and supportive, but it's not as dense as compact bone. Then the medullary cavity forms the compact bone collar and thickens, and the secondary ossification center appears in the epiphysis. So we start off with cartilage. That cartilage brings in the osteoblast. The osteoblasts make the spongy bone. Then we start to have the compact bone. And then it says during childhood, growth is still possible as long as the cartilage remains at the growth plates. So maybe, and this is kind of situational, somebody goes to the doctor, they can tell by the growth plates whether or not somebody is growing, still growing, or the potential to grow. Think about the development of a newborn baby to a 10-year-old child, or even a 15-year-old young adult, teenager, whatever you want to call that. There's a lot of growth and development that happens in that time, so our bones need to be constantly adapting and changing to those structural growths, the growing pains, essentially. All right, so the steps in bone repair are, there's three kind of main steps. So you have a hematoma. Maybe you've heard of a hematoma before. This is essentially a blood clot that is formed between the broken bones, and I'll show an image here in the next slide that'll be a little bit more descriptive. You have fibrocartilaginous callus, which is a cartilage patch that forms between the broken bones. That takes about 3 weeks. And then you have a bony callus. This is cartilage patches turned into bone. So it could take 3 to 4 months. So if anybody's ever had like a boot or a cast or crutches or things like that, you're taking the 3 to 4 months or weeks, 6 to 8 weeks that it does take to repair that bone. So that first step there's that hematoma. This is essentially that blood clot. What happens here is because we have blood vessels in our bone, we don't want us to continue to like internally or externally bleed after breaking a bone. So that's what that hematoma does, is it kind of makes like a blood clot, like a roadblock. Like, for example, if there was, an unfortunate car accident, it's kind of like the police officer that's going to stop everybody that's around it so that nobody else, comes into that car accident. Then you have that the fibrocartilous callus, and this is that second step here, and it kind of makes like a hard, like cartilage substance. That's kind of that transition between making that new bone. Then we have the bony callus, and then you have remodeling and healed structure. So that bony callus, it starts off as spongy bone and it transitions into compact bone, just like the previous couple of slides there, how it talks about the development and growth of bone. Then we have remodeling. So as you can see here, there's probably a weird lump or bump on this bony callus here, but after some time, the fracture can be healed. It takes a while, but it happens. So maybe you've heard of osteoporosis. This is a condition where bones are weakened due to decreased bone mass. So bone mass meaning the density of the bone, the amount of space it takes up, the mass, and things like that. The bone reabsorption exceeds production usually by age 40. So we have things that are absorbing damaged or unuseful parts of our bone, but we're not reproducing as much. So our bones are not as strong. They're not as durable. This here, it says there's risk factors. So if you fall into something of these categories, you're more susceptible to this osteoporosis. And osteoporosis can lead to fractures and other complications. Here's a picture of osteoporosis. The picture on the left, A, is somewhat of a normal area of bone. This is most likely spongy bone because of the structure. And now we see on the right that osteoporosis, it's kind of that degenerated bone look. It's not as dense, it's a little bit more, more spaces as opposed to the left picture. Then there's no real treatments for osteoporosis. it can completely, but that can completely reverse the established, but there are some preventative things like having enough calcium, vitamin D, and exercise. When you or somebody exercises, say that you're a runner, your bones and your spongy bone matrix at the ends of your bones will reorient themselves in order to adapt to the impact that you're doing. So should everybody who's never run before go out and run a marathon? Probably not, but that's also why you have some sort of training, right? Maybe you're training for a 5K. Okay, couch to 5K, there's apps all over the place for that. But with training in your body, not only are you getting in better cardiovascular shape in order to adapt to that, but the bones and the muscles in your body are readjusting to that impact that is maybe possibly new for that person. Let's say if they've never run a 5K before and they're going to go train for a 5K, the preventative thing to osteoporosis is kind of gaining that strength in your bones and your muscles through exercise. Maybe that means going for a walk. Maybe that means going for a bike ride, things like that. Drugs effectively maintain bone density by inhibiting the release of calcium from the bones. So there are drugs that can help with osteoporosis. Then we have biphosphonates that are most common medications prescribed for osteoporosis treatment. And there's just a couple of examples there that we don't really need to go through. So now we have joints. So joints are where bones meet bones. And maybe you've heard of somebody saying, oh, my joints ache. Or, oh, I have an achy shoulder or elbow. Okay? Joints are where bones meet bones. And the bones are held together by ligaments. And you've maybe heard of some of those ligaments, especially in the knee. Those are maybe the most common, most talked about ones, like your ACL. The L in MCL, ACL stands for ligament, okay? So where bone meets bone, think of like your hip, your shoulder, your knee, your elbow. There's different types of joints. The first one is called fibrous, and this is usually immovable, which is structures between cranial bones. Cranial meaning your brain. So the joints, there's a lot of different bones in your skull around your brain. It's not just like one big skull, but these are not movable, right? I can't really move my skull as much, but there's a lot of different bones up here that make up my skull. Then you have your cartilaginous, which tend to be slightly movable, and these are in your invertebral discs. Okay, so I can move forward and backward, side to side. I can twist most of the time unless I'm a little sore, but there are some movements that I can't do, right, in my back. It's also to help protect the back and the vertebrae and the spinal cord. Then you have your synovial joints, and these are the mainly free movable joints, such as the ball and socket joints in your hips, your shoulder joints, and the hinge at your knee and elbows. And there's different types of those synovial joints, which we don't really go into, but there's an image here on the next slide. So that top image is a synovial joint, and that is your knee, and it's showing in the kind of blue and purple, mainly that light bluish gray color, that those are the different ligaments. And then you've got some articular cartilage and some joint cavity filled with synovial fluid. So there's fluid in your joints, and that's the one at your knee. Okay, so my knee, and I hope most of you can see me, and you could try this wherever you're sitting too. Most of the time you can swing it back and forth. And as soon as I start to go in and out, adducting and adducting, my hip gets involved here. I can't just like bend my knee to the left and to the right without getting my hip involved. So in your synovial joint with your knee, most of the movement is forward and back. Okay, then you've got your hip. Okay, your hip has a lot more movement than your knee. I can move my leg up and back. I can move it in and out, abducting and adducting. I can move it in a little circle, which I can't do with my knee. Okay, so these are all called synovial joints, but thinking of it as like a ball and socket for that next one. And the hinge joint being like your knee and your elbow. Okay, so my elbow, I can only kind of do these, right, when I do some bicep curls, right? Same thing with my knee. But your shoulder is very similar to your hip, whereas I can go in and out, back and forward. And those are the different types of joints. Okay, here's an image just showing kind of the different types of joints mechanical wise. You've got a pivot joint that's in your neck. So we can all try that right now. Can you pivot and look to your left and look to your right? That's a pivot joint, okay? You can also move up and down with your neck, and then you're supposed to be like, yes, we love class and lecture. Yes, okay. Then you've got ball and socket joint that says in your hip, which you can also try that where you're at. Maybe you move your leg forward and backward, side to side, like a ball and socket. So kind of like moving my fist in my hand here. You've got the hinge joint at your elbow and at your knee. You have a saddle joint between your trapezium, your carpal bone, and your first metacarpal bone. So in your wrist, so I can move forward, backwards. I can move side to side, but I can't move one way. So we can try that as well. And then your plane joint between your tarsal bones and your foot, so you can point, flex, you can invert and extrovert your ankle and things like that. So those are the different types of joints. This is just a blown up picture of the muscle, the tendon, the bursa, and the synovial cavity. So the muscle here is in that pinkish reddish color at the top. Whether or not our muscles contract or flex and release is how that bone is kind of told to move. Then the tendon is how the muscle connects to the bone and the joint, as well as the ligaments. And then there's that synovial cavity, which is filled with synovial fluid. So thinking of when there's a joint, like a synovial joint, that there has to be some fluid movement there. This just says, why do bones crack and pop? It's that fluid that is filled in with that cavity. We can take a look at this video, but I'll let you guys do that on your own time so we can keep moving forward here. We're going to move forward onto the muscular system. Okay, so it's kind of transitioning a little bit. Chapter 12, Chapter 13, muscular system. So we have a couple of new points to ponder. We're about halfway through the slides here, okay? So the first thing we want to know is the 3 different types of muscle tissue. And we've talked about this before in a previous chapter. We're going to talk about the functions of the muscular system. We're going to talk about some of the most common muscles. We're going to talk about how skeletal muscles and fibers are structured and created. We're going to talk about how skeletal muscles contract. What are some muscular disorders and serious diseases? So just a review, we should remember this from a previous chapter. There are 3 different types of muscle tissue. The first one is smooth muscle tissue, and this helps with involuntary muscle movements found in hollow organs, such as your stomach and things like that, your colon. This is involuntary muscle movement. So there are muscles that are moving in your body that you're not consciously thinking of. That's that involuntary movement. You have cardiac, which is also involuntary. Thank goodness I don't have to continue to tell my heart to pump as we're going about our daily lives. This is an involuntary muscle found in the heart. We've seen the video or the picture of a heart contracting. You're not consciously telling your heart to do that. And then we have skeletal muscle. And this is mainly voluntary muscle that is attached to the skeleton, which is why it's called skeletal muscle. And this is allowing me to move my knee hinge back and forth. It's allowing me to do a squat, go up the steps, walk to class. Those are all of those things that I'm consciously telling my body to do. Here's an example and a picture of those 3 types of muscle tissues. You can see the difference in their texture and their structure. Here are the functions of the skeletal muscles. They help support the body by allowing us to stay upright. Okay, so the bones are kind of the structural part, but the muscles allow us actually to stay upright. Okay, it also helps us with our human-like posture. Allow for the movement by attaching to the skeleton, so they are attached to the bones, and the bones, by the way that the muscle is either like contracting or releasing, and how it does that in a certain motion allows those bones to structurally move. It helps maintain our constant body temperature think like when you go outside and it's really cold, you know, maybe you get a little tense and you start to shiver or your body starts to shake. That's a movement that your body is trying to help warm up with the muscles. Same thing when you're like really hot, maybe you're sweating, things like that, your muscles are a little bit more relaxed. Assist the blood and the lymphatic vessels. So this helps your blood pump, right? When you're running, your blood is pumping and your heart rate is up a little bit more than when you're walking, at least for most people, I guess. And then protect the internal organs and stabilize the joints. So you have like, even though maybe we would want more of them, we have abdominals right here in our stomach that in front of us that are protecting those internal organs. While your abdominal and your core are good for posture, structure, movement, things like that, they're also there to help protect your stomach and your internal organs. So here's a picture of that musculoskeletal system. It's a little hard to see, so we're going to zoom in just a wee bit here. Okay, so we have things like your triceps, your biceps, your pectoralis major, which are, I should write on these for you. I think that's helpful. All right, so you have your triceps, which is made up of 3. You have your biceps up here. You have your pectoralis major here. You have your, it's hard to see. Oh, here we go. Your quadriceps, your hamstrings. You guys maybe know that quads are on the front, hamstrings are on the back here. You have your gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus here that make up the gluteus muscles there. You have your soleolus, your lots of other different muscles that are really hard to see here, so I kind of want to zoom in. Don't want to miss anything. Your adductor longus, which is that muscle kind of running down part of your quadriceps here. Your rectus abdominis, your trapeze, the deltoids here on the back, etc. Biceps brachii, all of those. This is a good visualization. Like I said, you don't have to memorize any of these muscles. Just knowing maybe like the word humerus is a bone and the word bicep is a muscle. You maybe understand where that's located, but understanding that like the difference and maybe you've heard of something before and to identify that. And then there on that right picture, we have that picture we've seen before. So of our upper extremities, so we've talked about the bones of our upper extremities. Here's the muscles of our upper extremities. Anterior, meaning the front of, and posterior, meaning the back. So you can see that as an example there on the picture. Your anterior has your pectoralis major, your deltoids, and your biceps brachii. Your posterior behind has your trapezius, your other part of your deltoid, and your tricep brachii. Lower extremity muscles, remember anterior and posterior. Anterior, you have your adductor and your sartorius, which are all up. Your adductor and your sartorius here. And then you have your quadriceps, which make up 4. They make up your rector femoris, your vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, and your vastus medialis. Your posterior, you have your adductor, so it's allowing you to add into, which is on the back here. You have your biceps formius, which is your hamstrings, and you have your gastrocnemius, which is here. And that's what makes up your lower versus your upper extremities. I talked a little bit about that core, what is known as the core, and you're having an anterior and posterior part of your core. The rectus abdominis and the external obliques are what make up that like stereotypical ab-looking area. And then you have your posterior, which is made up of your trapezius, your latius dorsi, and your gluteus maximus, all in your lower back here in what makes up your core. Most, if not all, sports have to deal with core, whether that be running, baseball, football, wrestling, bowling, soccer, basketball. A lot of that movement comes from that core. It comes from the powerfulness, the trunk of your body, It comes from rotation, things like that. So how do muscles react together? So some muscles work together and others work as opposing parts. So if you'd like to try this with me, if you hold your arm out and bring your hand towards your head, do like a little bicep curl, okay? If you put your hand on your bicep, you're like, wow, I'm strong. Okay, so now you have one muscle that is contracting and one muscle is relaxing. Okay, so what's happening here is the bicep contracts at the same time and pulls that forearm up. Okay, so this muscle is shortening on the top. All right, the tricep contracts on the bottom here to pull that muscle back down. So now my tricep is contracting. So on the way up, if you feel your bicep, on the way down, you can feel your tricep. One is shortening and one is lengthening, which allows for that movement. You can do the same thing with your quads and your hamstrings. As you sit down, if you lift your knee up, your quadricep is contracting. Okay, maybe you've ever done that exercise in the gym before where you sit down and you have that bar across your shins and you go like this. Yeah, 150 pounds, 275, anyone? Yeah, lots of quad strength. No, I'm just kidding. That's the same thing, right? Your quad is contracting, your hamstring is lengthening and relaxing to bring your knee back down. You guys can't really see me very well, but to bring that knee back down to normal like I'm sitting, that quadricep has to relax and those hamstrings are contracting. So that's how a couple of those muscles work together or in opposing parts. So when the skeletal muscles contract, they transmit forces to bones and move them. So as that muscle is contracting in my bicep, it's allowing my forearm to move towards my face or my hand towards my face. All right, so they have different skeletal muscular systems. So there's muscle fibers and there's tendons. So these muscle fibers, they're skeletal muscles that are bundles of muscle fibers. When I hear the word fibers, I think of string-like, web-like substances that interact with bones and one another that are bundled inside a dense connective tissue sheath. And then you have also you have tendons. Maybe you've heard of somebody having like tendonitis in their elbow or their shoulder or their ankle, things like that. This is extensions of that connective tissue sheath that attach to skeletal muscles and bones. So when you think of the muscles and the bones, they aren't just like a muscle and a bone. There's things that attach them to each other to help with those muscular skeletal systems. So just a little bit more about that muscle organization. A skeletal muscle is composed of many bundled fibers. Of those muscle fibers, they are made of, one of those fibers is made up of myofibrils, which the myofibrils are composed of myofilaments that are both thick and thin filaments. Then they repeat until the myofibril is a sarcomere. So I think of a sarcomere as, let's see if I can zoom in. No. It won't let me zoom in. But so what I think of these that look like, it looks like the pull and peel kind of licorice, right? So you guys all know what pull and peel licorice looks like. It's like it looks like a long licorice, but you can also pull it apart. Does anybody just take a big bite out of those? We can no longer be friends. You have to pull them individually. It tastes different. Same thing as like when you eat string cheese. You just take a big bite out of it. You got to pull it. It's different. Tastes different. Quote me on that. All right. So this is that myofibril. That would be like a piece of the pull and peel licorice. Okay. And of that piece of the pull and peel licorice, there's different light bands and dark bands. And they make up a sarcomere. And as you can see kind of here in that middle part of that picture, it looks like a pull and peel licorice, right? So here's that pull and peel licorice. And of that pull and peel licorice, then you kind of put all the pull and peel licorices together that are in the same package, and that makes up that bundle of muscle fibers here. Okay, so it's broken down into like string-like substances that make up what's called a sarcomere. So that was that word here at the bottom of that slide. The sarcomere, the myofibrils are made up of two myofilaments. They are a thin filament and a thick filament. The first one is a thin filament, and it consists of two intertwining strands of a protein actin. And I'll show you that a little bit. It's kind of, if you think about like, okay, so I have an individual strand of the pull and peel licorice. What's that made up of? Well, it's probably made up of like some sort of, and I don't know this for a fact, but probably gelatin of some sort, maybe some sort of sugar substance that's in that licorice. That's like that actin protein that we're talking about. And I'll show you in the next slide here. The thick filament is composed of several hundred molecules of protein called myosin. So you have actin and you have myosin. They're two different proteins. And this is kind of shaped like a golf club, it says. And I'll show you that in the next slide. And these slide over one another in order to have that muscle contraction. So here, one part of actin looks like those little kind of round ball circles here at the top of the page. The myosin is what looks like that golf club, kind of. And then so all together, we have an arrangement of myosin in the thick and the actin in the middle. And together it's like an actin-myosin complex that allow us to move. So we have motor units and muscle tension. So a motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it controls are called one motor unit. And these muscle fibers, they're organized in motor units that contract in response to signals from the other motor neurons. So these neurons are telling, essentially, they're the communication, they're the telephone poles that are saying, hey, muscle, Alex is wanting you to contract. And then that's essentially what that motor neuron does. And it's telling that muscle or sending an electrical current in order for it to do something. Some of that's involuntary and some of that is voluntary. We talked about that with the different types of muscles. So you have signals and responses. So the signals from the motor neurons result in action potentials. Maybe you've heard of an action potential before. And this is when the muscle fibers cause a release of calcium. And when that calcium is released, it kind of floods out and allows the actin and the myosin heads to interact, and the muscle contraction occurs. So far with our skeleton and our muscle, we've seen that calcium is fairly important. So now we have a muscle contraction. This is that sliding of the actin filament, that the pull and peel licorice that slide across and past each other, past the myosin filaments and shortening the sarcomere. So when a muscle contracts, we have that shortening of that sarcomere and the myofibrils of all the muscle fibers. So think of lengthening and contracting, they're kind of sliding off of each other. And here's a little visualization of that. You have some actin, which kind of look like the little rough bead-like strings here. And then you have that myosin, which kind of looks like the normal licorice, I guess we could say. You have Z bands, which are on the ends here. So the relative positions of actin and myosin filaments are inside a sarcomere between the contractions, and they are relative positions of actin and myosin here on the bottom in the same sarcomere that are contracted. So as you can see, the one on the top kind of is pulled apart, and the one on the bottom is kind of pushed together. Got a couple slides left, and these are talking about muscle disorders and diseases. So you've maybe heard of somebody having a sprain, a strain, a spasm, or a cramp in their muscles. And maybe you know what that means. The one that gets most confusing or most mixed up would be a difference between a sprain and a strain. So I have sprained my ankles multiple times playing soccer, and that is when I would stretch and tear a ligament or something in my ankle. Okay? You can sprain your ankle, you can sprain any place that has like where muscle and ligaments kind of meet. A strain, S-T-R-A-I-N, is the stretching or tearing of a muscle. So if you strain a muscle, like you could strain your quadricep. And sometimes that feels like a little ball or a little rough spot in your muscle. Maybe you have to kind of work that out. Sometimes it depends what the level of the intensity is there. A spasm is a sudden involuntary muscle contraction. So that would be like when you're sitting here and you're listening to me and you're getting a little tired and your eye starts to twitch. That would be a spasm. And then you have cramps, which are strong, powerful spasms often occurring at night or after exercise, especially if you're dehydrated or don't have enough electrolytes in your body. Maybe you felt like a cramp in your calf or your quad, or maybe even your hands or your toes. It kind of feels like somebody's like grabbing you. I've had some pretty intense like leg cramps through athletics, but that's that straining, overuse of the muscle, dehydration, depletion of those minerals that I was talking about, and not enough blood is getting to that muscle, so it starts to contract so that it changes the pressure and allows more blood to get to that area. Lastly, here's some muscular diseases, okay? Maybe some of them you've heard of, maybe some of you haven't. One of the more common ones would maybe be muscular dystrophy. This is a group of genetic disorders in which the muscles progressively degenerate and weaken. Sarcomas is another one you've maybe heard of. This is cancers that originate in the muscle or a connective tissue that is associated with the muscle. And then ALS is also maybe known as Lou Gehrig's disease. This is a motor neuron degenerate. So it's where those motor neurons, the ones that are like the telephone poles that are communicating to those muscles, where they degenerate and die, and it leads to the loss of voluntary muscle movement. So voluntary meaning that it's conscious movement. And then there's a couple other ones there that cause like chronic achy muscles or achy muscles due to an injury or an infection. All right, does anybody have any questions over this topic? Any questions over the exam? Anything like that? Okay. Well, if it comes across your mind, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to help you answer that. We have our exam on Friday, lab on Wednesday. Make sure that in the next couple of days you take some time to relieve your stress. Maybe that means doing the exact activity we just did, asking your friends some silly and thought-provoking questions. Or maybe that means doing some stress relief activities. But just know that we will all get through it. And I'm here if you guys need anything, just reach out.